Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton,
I'm Jade Walle.
I'm Jake Buscher.
and all three of us have gone to the moon. We are the this week's editions of the special edition FAIRtax guys. As you heard last week, we have decided to suspend the weekly 30-minute podcast. But I mean, the next day after we made that decision, we get the email. Yeah, Jake says, "Yeah, I'll be happy to talk to you." So this is our first FAIRtax Power Radio special. And it has to do with the way the Americans for Fair Taxation as an organization is evolving and preparing for the future. I mean, guys like Steve Hayes have been around for a long time. Randy Fisher, I'm not really on the board of AFFT. I'm in the Florida group. The leadership is kind of aging, and we want to make sure that we leave the organization in good hands. So, Jade, explain what AFFT is doing to address our future leadership needs.
Sure, Bob, and great to be with you again. It's been a minute since I've been on your podcast, so happy to be on, and great having Jake here as well. Bob, I'll lead in. I'll answer your question, but I'll do it in a roundabout way. One
Okay.
time I read a book on traits of successful leaders, and what are the top 10 traits? And there's a million books out there like this, but this one in particular, one of the last traits it brought up for a great leader was that you plan for your successors. And it said, actually, when you might have some of the best leaders in the world, and if they're weak on one of these 10 or 15 traits of leadership, this is oftentimes one of the things that will atrophy a little bit relative to everything else that they've got going on. And so, in the spirit of planning for your successors, a trait of great leadership, the board of AFFT is realized that we need to plan for the next generation. Unless we can get this done in the next 12 months, and again, that's the ultimate goal here, is to put all of us out of a job.
Yes.
Unless we can do this in the next 12 months, we need to plan for the next generation. We need to plan for our successors. And so what that means is reaching a younger demographic. And to your point earlier, Bob, there's a lot of history and experience and great relationships that the now what we now call the executive board has, and we want to pass that down to the next generation. And maybe there's a selfish result, maybe not intent, but a win-win scenario here, because then you actually have a better platform to reach out to younger folks. For example, Steve Hayes had actually reached out and spoken with Charlie Kirk before he was assassinated. And, the feedback, if not direct, at least indirectly, was, I reach a younger demographic. How is this? How can we relate? And part of it is, what's the composition of your board and the age demographic there, as well, reaching out to folks like Grant Cardone, who have finance guy who has an incredible following, a lot of folks in their 20s and 30s. And so that was some of the intent about around the what we now call the executive board, creating the new board, or the board of Americans for Fair Taxation, that Jake is a member of, and we've got several other folks. I'll say in the 20s to 40s range, and it's really one meant to pass the torch, and also to be a little bit more strategic in reaching some other groups that maybe the executive board just didn't have the ammunition to reach, if you will, if that makes sense.
All right. Well, Jake, so certainly glad to have you on board here. The first question to you will be, how did you first learn about the fair tax? What caught your eye about it? And what made you decide, hey, this is something I want to try to get involved in?
Yeah, Bob. Well, let me tell you the story. I started out deeply interested in economics. And as I looked into it, I found that the obvious solution for taxation was the consumption tax. And the only question was, well, what type? And for a while, I had been a fan of various VAT taxes or VAT taxes, but I never really heard from accountants and CPAs and people who were actually on the ground dealing with them. And I ended up bringing Steve Hayes on my podcast, which turned into a 2.5-hour podcast on the fair tax. And it was wonderful. And it was really I was really interested to hear his perspective on practicing in Europe, the people he knew and his experience, and how bad the VAT tax can get, and how complicated and the administrative burden, and how consumption taxes were the answer, but actually the sales tax, which is kind of under my nose the entire time in this investigation was actually the best vehicle for it. So he answered a lot of questions and objections that I had, and I got to dive into the bill and find out that this wasn't just some ham-handed attempt at legislation. It was really well crafted, well thought out, and it was developed with a blend of solid economic insights, but also very practical accounting level expertise about how this would roll out in our nation. That's what really impressed me. And then seeing that there was a history of success where at one point there was a third of Congress voted in favor to actually enact this. And that really impressed me. I mean, Jade and you have mentioned the older board, but the older board built this entire organization, raised a massive amount of awareness, got this into Congress. It is HR 25. People could vote on it. That's an incredibly impressive win. And I think people who are my age should be honored to kind of catch the ball at this point and try to run it down further afield. So that's kind of how I was introduced to it. And what really made me more passionate about it, I see we kind of have the future theme with the space and whatnot here. What made me passionate about it was the change in technology that we've been seeing with AI. Whereas before, we can argue on the merits of a consumption tax. We can argue on the merits of a sales tax. And the recent article from the White House looking at states who move towards a sales tax from an income tax model, incredible information. Everybody should read it, and it really supports the fair tax thesis. But with AI and the very possible near-term disruption in the income base, it makes an income tax model for our nation not just like an option, it makes it into a reckless option, where this is the exact tax base which we think is most ripe for disruption. Maybe not in the long term, nobody knows the future, but in the short term, we could see job displacement and we could see a mismatch of skills which used to be highly compensated, thus highly taxed, not quite fitting with the next group of jobs which are generated. And historically, we know that the income tax is more volatile than what a consumption tax would be. So moving into the future, we could massively compound this. And with a massive amount of debt, huge government spending, the idea we should all be putting our eggs in one income tax basket at this point, to me, seems incredibly reckless.
That's all right. Well, what is your vision for you and your compatriots there on this new board? What do you see pushing forward here? Where are we going to be if we don't get it in the next 12 months? Where are we going to be 5 years from now?
I mean, I'm not going to pretend to know the future, but I will tell you the things that people are excited about now. We've already had some of the young board members go on to some social media platforms and do really well. So I'm excited about their entrance into that. We've also had, me and Jim Bennett have gone to Congress a number of times and talked to people and made great connections. And I think that that's something that more of the board is probably going to get involved in. And being able to create those really long-term relationships is important. That network takes a long time and many years to build up. So I think that's what many are excited about doing. It's what Steve, is what Jim, is what Jade and others have been doing. So carrying that forward is certainly something we're going to do. But I think the last bit is just injecting our solution into the conversations about the future with AI and with the rapid changes that we could be seeing, because taxes haven't been part of it. We've seen it kind of hinted at with people like Elon Musk and others saying, in the future, we might need a UBI, or in the future, we might need to have, and they're throwing out these solutions when in fact, I think being able to capture taxes at the very end of the production, at the point of consumption, no matter how value is created, is the answer. And although there are many thoughts on the prebate and UBI and whatnot, I could see us being in that conversation as people address how exactly people at the bottom of the income strata are going to be protected and isolated from disruptions coming forward in the AI revolution.
Yeah, Bob, if I might, what Jake is touching on there, I think it was very eloquent what Jake said around the way to capture the value from a tax perspective at that endpoint of consumption. And what popped into my mind is that's simple, it's fair, it has fewer steps than, like, let's say, relative to an income tax, obviously, but also relative to a VAT in Europe, which is a taxation at every stage of production, which can be very numerous and also be open to various nefarious um, opportunities for obfuscation at different stages of production. But with a simple tax at consumption, the fair tax, it reminds me of what I've written about in several chairman's articles. It's called Occam's razor. So hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and centuries, hundreds of years old, many centuries ago, Occam's razor basically said to any problem, any issue we have, usually 99 times out of 100, the most simple, straightforward solution is going to be the best solution to any problem. So if we present a problem of maybe our tax system isn't the best, or you can phrase it as to what's the best way through tax. Well, what's the simplest? What has the fewest steps? What has the less process steps such that there's less opportunity for fraud or defalcation? It's the fair tax. So just thought I'd add that in there on top of Jake's comments.
Yeah,
He did, though. He noted, and I think correctly, that the income tax is inevitably going to collapse under its own weight. Now, Jade, you're a CPA. You really didn't work in the tax line of service to begin with, but you obviously have some expertise in that. Uh, Hazard a guess, how long is it going to be, in your opinion, before the income tax is just unviable as a way to fund the government?
Like Jake, I don't own a crystal ball, but sometimes I'll like to pretend that I can see into the future. But anyone's guess here. But I don't think it's longer rather than shorter. I think it's sooner rather than later. What is the impetus that brings that all down? It's something that goes along with, I always think to, when do we reach that point? Is it 50 trillion of debt, 60 trillion of debt, where we just can't sell enough T-bills or T-notes to pay off the debt that's coming due right now, whether it's 1 month, 6 months, 12-month notes, and T-bills and notes. At some point, they'll have what's called a failed auction. Could it be at that point that the whole system unravels, including the income tax system? Would it be before then? I don't know. I mean, we're over 1 trillion of illegal evasion every year, the tax gap, they call it, what we should collect based on the law versus what the Treasury does collect. Um, what's the straw that breaks the camel's back? Is it 2 trillion of illegal evasion each year? I just don't know, but I think it's sooner rather than later.
it
All right.
definitely seems like
Go ahead,
sure.
Jake.
It definitely seems like different economies can handle different levels of taxation and debt, based on demographics and whatnot. But I do know that a lot of economists have pointed out that in Europe, they would not be able to deal with their tax burden if not for a heavily reliant system on the consumption taxes, just because the Laffer curve works differently for income taxes and consumption taxes, where if you tax income more and more at a higher rate, well, then you can get less and less of it, and then your total tax receipts decline, even though you increase the tax rate. But consumption taxes are different because as you increase that rate, it diverts more into savings, thus investment, and it can actually drive productivity in some sectors, and you can recover even from a fairly serious tax hit. So I think in many places, European countries are a model for a system that would have failed if they had been income tax dependent. And a lot of economists would say exactly that. Just a word about, Jade kind of uses this heuristic, and I think it's very helpful to use heuristics sometimes, like Occam's razor. One that I typically do to make decisions is I imagine, okay, what if I already made the decision in the affirmative? Would I then decide to undo it? And this, to me, is incredibly powerful across a range of decisions, but it makes the option between a fair tax and the current system unbelievably clear. I mean, imagine this was a different world and we were on Power Radio and we were advocates for the current system. What on earth would we even say? What would we, as three people, say in favor of our current system to try to convince people to switch to what we have now from a fair tax? somebody might call in and say, well, will we be better off in 5 years? And we'd go, well, no. Okay, well, what about evasion? Oh, it will be much worse. Okay, what about the Laffer curve? Oh, cuts seriously against us in a way that if Europe is a leading model, could be absolutely catastrophic. Well, AI is changing the race. Oh, we're going to link all of our income, practically over 70%, to a declining tax base that could be disrupted without notice in light of a crushing debt, looming deficits, and we could actually hit a cycle whereby we have to raise taxes, which means that labor becomes even less competitive against automation, which means it automates faster to lose more jobs, creating a vicious cycle that spirals us into inevitable austerity or default. But what about changing to our system? We would be laughed out of the conversation. And I brought this up at a number of meetings when me and Jim would go to Congress. I would just say, okay, let's pretend that we're lobbying for the current system. Come on, play it out with me. And they do. They typically laugh and they go, okay, I see your point. Yeah. If we had already been in the fair tax, the idea of switching to the current corrupt, unbelievably complicated system that's entirely opaque, unbelievably economically destructive, unfair, and unwise in light of the future is laughable.
Well said.
Jade, if I remember right, we had an episode a good little while back where you actually had to do that. We put you in the hot seat and said, all right, advocate for the. You remember that?
Yes, I do. That was fun, Bob. So Jake, you'll love this old FAIRtax Power Radio episode. It's probably, goodness, what, 4 or 5 years ago. And I was the guy, we were in a fair tax regime. We're in this world, and I came in.
And Senator Walle was trying to sell his new tax plan, and we weren't buying it.
Ron and Bob tore me up. And it was all I could do to keep from laughing. But Jake, you stated that so well, and actually reminds me of the very last chapter or post log of the first fair tax book, where Neil Bortz kind of does what you said there, but he goes on. It is like 7-8 pages in a lot of detail, and you were just as articulate as him, if not more. And to your point, Bob, Jake brings up a really interesting point. We're getting into the bowels of economics here, but how Europe has kind of hung on because a proportion of their tax base is the VAT, and it is on consumption. One of the things you and Ron and I used to always say, what was it about? Even if you saving is just deferred spending. Remember that little coined phrase we had? And that goes to Jake's point there. Even if you save, outside the economic benefits of saving, productivity, production, investment, new businesses, etc., it will get spent. You think about existing wealth, the Rockefellers, the J.P. Morgans in the 1800s and all this kind of stuff. That's always been one thing. You can tax income, but these uber wealthy existing wealth franchise families, they're not earning a W-2, right?
Some of that gets passed down through generations before it gets spent, but it eventually gets spent.
Yeah. Maybe they pay some capital gains tax, but you're not taxing existing wealth under the system, which supposedly is a more fair system to soak the rich and everything. The fair tax, to your point, Bob, it will get spent. Even if you save it, savings is just deferred spending. So it will get spent, and that consumption tax will come into play. So, for what it's worth.
Hey, while we're getting in the weeds about fairness, I mean, there's many weeds to go into, but I just want to point out one is there is, like it or not, a giant anti-rich thing going on right now. And it doesn't normally play out
politically expedient for some folks. They try to exploit that.
But here's something a point that I think very few people make is when you look at incomes which are at the very top of the income strata, let's take a surgeon, for example, commonly comes up on the list very high. You'll notice something with an economic lens about each and every one of them, and that is that they have a very inelastic supply, meaning you can't just get another surgeon tomorrow. There's capped amounts of doctors that can get into slots, and there's only so many people who can be surgeons, and it would take, 15 years to get a new surgeon online. So what we know is if you tax something with an inelastic supply curve, the tax does not hit the producer, but the consumer. Meaning if we say, oh, let's get fairness, whatever that means, and let's tax the highest earners the most, ironically, the burden of that tax actually goes on those who are consuming their labor. And that means that their take-home pay will relatively stabilize over time, while their gross pay will become incredibly high and bloated, meaning we've shifted that task onto the elderly and the poor who consume massive amounts of medical services if we're looking at this group. And it's not actually hitting the group that we're supposedly leveling the playing field with. And we've actually just done an incredibly roundabout version of a consumption tax, which is miles more economically destructive, more difficult to administer, doesn't actually ever solve this supposed fairness problem, when instead we could have implemented a fair tax that is what it says on the label. So I think that one, ironically, can increase income inequality, at least nominally, with a supposed fix to it, which is from a broken tax system.
Well said. That's a good point. I hadn't
See the
thought
wheels
about that.
turning in your head, Jay. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I was just going to say, Jake, great point. I had not a thought in a lot of depth about the inelastic supply, because there are elements of our, service chain. I think it'd probably be more services than products, but it could come into the products world as well. But great point, and it all holds true. It all holds true. And I think just for our viewers, what you're kind of saying there is, listen, that surgeon, because it's inelastic, maybe he makes $1 million now, or she, but now he's going to raise prices such that maybe his income is 1.1 or 1.2 million to make up for the tax rate going from 40% to 50%, so he can be relatively the same, and where it falls out is on the poor and those receiving the services from the surgeon.
Tax cost, I mean, just the income tax on a surgeon like that, it's the same as corporate tax. It's just a cost of doing business that ultimately gets rolled down to the end consumer, whether you're buying a loaf of bread or whether you need heart surgery. I mean, all of the costs involved in getting a product or service to you, including the tax costs that are imposed along the way, are paid by the consumer. So it's just a whole lot easier to impose the tax on the retail consumption of products and services, is it not?
Oh, yeah. And far less economically distortionary, too, because we're distorting prices wildly when we do that, which changes the price signals and incentives and everything else down the line. Another point is, you mentioned a little bit earlier about, how a lot of people don't receive W-2 income. Maybe they inherited wealth. That certainly happens, but a growing sector are people who participate in the gig economy. They get a 1099, and those are easy to fudge. And you guys are shaking your head. You understand that.
I get a 1099. I do the play-by-play for the local community college's baseball games. I am not employed by the college, but I get a 1099. I provide professional services in that regard. Yeah, so I see where you're going there.
So, I mean, I have had a construction company for the last 7 years, and I know the nonsense that goes on with subcontractors asking for, hey, don't document this, pay this in cash. It's wild, but it's expanding because more people can connect with more other people and do services for them that it used to require a company. Because right now with AI, you can have your HR and legal and development and all sorts of things outsourced to AI, and you could see a world, and you already do, where we have a lot more freelance people just contracting with other individuals in a way where there's no mediating employer who has sucked your taxes out and remitted it to the government on your behalf. Meaning the opportunities for evasion in light of the AI disruption, the rise of the gig economy, is only expanding. In the meanwhile, we have the quantity of e-commerce and like the dominance of Amazon and other retailers, meaning that, and everything going through POS software, which automatically collects and can, remit in your accounting back of the house software, your liability for sales tax, means that we have two different directions. We have an income tax, which is becoming less stable, and we have a sales tax, which is becoming more audit friendly, more trustworthy, more reliable at the exact same time. So although we can go back to the 90s, the 2000s and whatnot, where you guys are pushing the fair tax and it made sense. It makes a lot more sense now, because the idea that you're going to audit a one-person company who has a tech-enabled 1 or 2 man team, no, it's not financially feasible or practically possible for the IRS to even do that audit. If we're talking about, can we ensure that the, I don't know, 100, 200 largest retailers that all use automated software, are most all publicly traded, are actually remitting the sales tax? Yeah, that's an easy punt right there.
Jade, where'd you find this guy?
I know. Well, I was going to say, aren't you impressed with our new board? I mean, Jake
I
is a
am.
shining example. I couldn't be more proud. And I'd say to give Jake a little bit more of some accolades here, he's created this AI model. And Bob, I know you've played around with it as well. It's a
Oh,
fun little model
he was the
on,
one that created
yes,
that trading tool. Oh,
yes.
good. Yeah, yeah. I had a lot of fun playing with that. We've got to have to we got to put the link to that somewhere in the comments so people can test their fair tax knowledge, and that's that right off to you for there. That's cool.
Yeah, thanks.
Absolutely. Now, Bob, I couldn't be more thrilled about where we're going in the future. Obviously, I'd love to see us all out of a job, like I said, get this done. But we're in great hands, and Jake, was your undergraduate in economics or anything? Because your feel for economics and your understanding is really top shelf.
Well, oh goodness. In college, I was business, I was biology for a while, I was philosophy for a while. I switched my major like 5 or 6 times, but I've always had a passion for economics, so I studied it independently. And coming out of college, I did 2 things which helped. One was I had a job. I began to start my construction company. So I was doing a lot of just blue collar labor by myself. So I would listen to books, I'd listen to podcasts, I'd listen to speeches, and I had hours and hours and hours every day to learn from all sorts of different economists. And the other thing I did was I decided I would get more politically involved. So everybody who would be running for Congress or running for a delegate seat, I would contact them. And to my amazement, they would meet with me, and I would sit down and I would discuss different policies, particularly economic policy, with them. And that went great. That was wonderful, because now you have to deal with some opposition from people who are really in the trenches. I was the shadow economic advisor. I say shadow because it was somebody of a different political party that I met with who decided to closet flip parties, so I can't share their name. In light of some of the conversations, I would read everything the party would send, mark it up, send it back. And then there were some others that I would meet with for a little bit. There was one person who actually requested a crash course on economics. So okay, I'll do it. So I set up 2 3-hour courses where I taught them as much economic as I possibly could. And they were running, they didn't win, but that candidate didn't win. The candidate who I wanted to win won. And I sat back thinking, okay, this is great. I have kind of a Manchurian candidate in the race. Then I have my other candidate that I want to win. No matter which way this goes, I'm happy. So early intervention into that helped me field a lot of questions. Then running the podcast that I have helped me really study a lot of topics in depth, get the chance to talk to a number of economists and get their perspectives on things. It also covers philosophy, theology, and some other topics, but that's in large part self-taught.
Jake, before we have to conclude, please plug your podcast.
Oh, sure. Yeah, check out Cutting the Gordian Knot podcast. We have 200 and something episodes, and I'm sure you can find good old Steve Hayes on there also. So yeah, if you're up for hearing me drone on even more and more than you did today, you got an option.
Sounds good. Well, I'll tell you what, we are actually a little bit over on time here, so we're going to have to wrap this up. I'll tell you, well, I could go on for another hour listening to this guy. And there are more like him in the pipeline, are there not?
Sure.
All right. Well, hopefully what we'll do is, Jade, if you can get these other guys to come on and talk with us, we will produce as many FairTax Power Radio special editions as we need to introduce the public here to the new leadership at Americans for Fair Taxation, and we wish you well. Again, I say we are a bit over time, so we are going to have to wrap this up. Jade, one more question. You're not related to the NASCAR driver Chris Buescher, are you?
No, not that I know of. I do drive.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I couldn't resist that. All right. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us, and we will hopefully be talking to you all in the future. Until we got to wrap this up. Thank you so much for watching, listening, sharing the video. That does help. Keep your eye on FairTax social media. We will be announcing it. Again, we're not on a weekly basis anymore, but we will be announcing these special editions, and hopefully the next one will be just as cool as this one has been. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Jade.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bob.
All right, till we meet again, reminding you that as we always do, that the fair tax is the only truly fair tax. Once you understand it,
You'll demand it.
So what would you do for her?
Well, we've got several programs that will help her. We just need to find out how much she makes. But the good news is, the less she does, the more we can help.
Yeah.
If I may, with the fair tax, we wouldn't even tax her income. So the more she makes, the more she has.
But still, a consumption tax could eat up a lot of her income.
Which is why at the beginning of every month, we're actually going to give back all that she pays in taxes on basic necessities.
You're going to give her back her taxes?
Every month, on everything taxed on basic necessities. But we're also going to give it back to you and to every American citizen.
Why?
Well, we believe taxes should be fair.